All right, welcome to the podcast. For this podcast, what I'm going to do is just field questions. And since we started the SBG podcast a year and a half, 2 years ago, I've received a whole bunch of questions via email, sometimes online, and people asking me to address certain issues related to the gym and the way we train. And we received enough that we thought we might as well just do a podcast and we'll knock these out. So I've compiled them here. I haven't spent too much time mulling over them. I wanted it to be kind of spontaneous and just answer as honestly as I can. They're all on paper because I know most people do this with a laptop, but I'm kind of old school, so they're here. I'm not going to mention anybody's name that sent the question, but I want you to know I sincerely appreciate the questions. They're great questions. Sometimes I get asked by multiple times the same question in different ways, and when that happened, we kind of maybe compile it into one question and we'll answer it that way. And if it's something I didn't cover at the end of this podcast that you really want to know an answer to, again, feel free to contact me online, email us, and the next time we do one of these, I'll try my best to get an answer for you. So let's get right into it. So the first question here is basically, I understand the SBG curriculum and the focus and the way I like to teach jiu-jitsu is related to postures, pressures, connection, and not so much technique on a technique by technique basis. And of course, people who are familiar with our epistemology know that that's kind of how I like to do the curriculum. How does that change when you teach kids or juniors? So two things here. There's some fantastic kids coaches that have decades of experience teaching kids in the organization. Luis Gutierrez, my first black belt, started teaching kids and having kids win championships 18, 20 years ago. Travis Davison has a thriving, growing guerrillas program, and he's really been helping a lot of the different coaches in the organization the last few years start running a really thriving kids program. So a lot of those questions are going to be better answered by them specifically. What I will say is kids love to drill, kids love jiu-jitsu, and I don't really think you need to dumb down the curriculum or all of a sudden start teaching on a technique-by-technique basis just because it's kids. You can turn the drills into games. You can, again, still focus on posture. You can focus on connection and pressure and base and all those qualities. And by the time those kids get to be young adults, and we already see this from the first generation of competitors that we have, their jiu-jitsu is phenomenal. So I would say seek out some of those coaches that I mentioned for more detail, but you don't need to dumb down jiu-jitsu for kids. If anything, they pick it up easier than adults half the time. All right, second question here. How long did it take you to get comfortable at black belt? So that's an interesting question. I received my black belt from my coach, Chris Howder, 17 years ago. And I've said quite a few times to my students when I'm teaching classes that I really do feel like in the last few years I've learned more about jiu-jitsu than I had the previous 25 years I've done it. So comfortable is a relative term. Am I comfortable as a coach and a teacher? I am, because that's what I've been doing for a living for 25 years. Am I comfortable in my knowledge of jiu-jitsu? I mean, I am consistently humbled by how much there is to learn about jiu-jitsu and how much I don't know. And spending time around my coaches, like Chris was just here a couple weeks ago, or getting to spend some time with Rickson Gracie at the end of last year, and I realized how much knowledge and jiu-jitsu wisdom somebody like Rickson has. And honestly, I'm just humbled by it. And that's what makes me love jiu-jitsu, is the fact that I wake up every day, I teach class, and I know I'm going to learn something new myself. So am I comfortable as a black belt? Yes. Do I think, I have all the answers? Absolutely not. And jiu-jitsu is one of those things that just never ends that way. Ready? Yep. What has jiu-jitsu taught you about the relationship between self and community? That's an interesting question. One of the most important things about what we do in terms of martial arts here in SBG isn't so much just the training of the physical martial art, but the community, the relationships you establish along the way, the friendships you make, the people that you help, the people that help you, your training partners. All that is so much more important than the actual martial art that we do. And when you spend a long time with this group of people, and you're all striving to get better and growing together in this craft, this trade that we do of fighting, you tend to mature alongside them and along with them, and the organization has matured, the coaches have matured, and we've all become, you know, hopefully better people, but certainly a little bit wiser. And we've done that together, just like you'll do that together with your training partners as part of the art. That's one of the great things about tribe. And you know, I don't want to cast a moral judgment on people that consistently travel from gym to gym or receive different belts from 4 different instructors. Sometimes, you know, maybe they're not comfortable in a particular place, or some people, that's just what they like to do. But I will say that it's just like any other relationship. Spending 10 or 15 or 20 years with the same person opens up opportunities for growth and intimacy and understanding that you just can't get any other way. And spending 10, 15, 20 years with that same group of people and growing together with your training partners, again, offers a certain kind of level of relationship and a chance for maturity that I think is hard to get when you're going from group to group to group. So I do think sometimes people that haven't found a place that they can call home and a group of people that they can work with consistently over time miss out on that. And what they're missing out on, which is what you're asking about, I think is one of the most beneficial things to what we do. What is the most common mistake new students make? The most common mistake I think I've seen over the decades that new students make is a failure to listen to their coach and a failure to relax. The first one is much easier to solve than the second one. So some people, it takes years to really learn how to physically relax. Being in a comfortable environment around people that you trust and a coach who you trust and whose advice you trust, that is extremely helpful in doing that. But again, some people, it just takes a long time. And you can't really short circuit that process. Having a community where the higher belts and the better athletes roll competitively but relaxed and serve as living examples is extremely helpful. Having coaches that talk about that and model that on the mat is extremely helpful. But to be honest, sometimes you just have to be patient. As far as not listening to the coach, that's something you can solve immediately. If you found a coach who's a professional and knows what they're doing and has your best interest at heart, you know, sometimes just take a moment and actually try the advice that they're trying to give you. Because usually what happens with people who struggle to learn jiu-jitsu, most of the time it's because they're more concerned in class with beating their training partner at that particular moment than they are learning jiu-jitsu. And if you just stop and focus and say, is this really going to help me get better, more technical at jiu-jitsu right now, doing this movement that I know my coach tells me is probably a mistake, but on this particular guy it'll work. And if you can just stop doing that, your growth will skyrocket, which is one of the reasons, we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, during the podcast, but it's one of the reasons that I found that women learn jiu-jitsu much faster than men, is usually they're not burdened by as much of that ego or stubbornness when it comes to learning. So that would be my response to that. Next question, what is the best approach to rolling with higher belts? This is all about context. So if you have an out-of-town instructor and he's a black belt and he's older and he's teaching a class, you want to be respectful and approach that with a level of respect and understand and not try when you touch hands with them and roll with them to kill them immediately, because that doesn't set a good example for your gym and it's just not a necessarily polite thing to do. But having said that, the best way to roll with higher belts is to roll just like you roll with anybody else. Roll competitively, but not rough. Usually, the faster you go, the faster you're going to tap. If the other black belt is rolling competitively with you as well, and you're a blue or purple belt, and you go real fast and hard, that's probably going to be a shorter match. Slow it down a little bit. Try and pace yourself. That way you can actually see what's happening to you while they're doing it, and you'll oftentimes learn more from the experience that way. Next question, what position do you consider the most important? There is no position that's more important than the other. In jiu-jitsu or in a fight, you have to know every position. You can't consider yourself good at fighting or good at jiu-jitsu if there's a position that you're just missing. Having said that, there's some positions that you're going to find yourself in fighting more than others. And of course, the guard, both holding guard and passing guard, is something that happens in almost every match and almost every fight that goes to the ground. Other positions, maybe you'll wind up in that position during the match, maybe you won't. Having said that, you still need to learn all of it. If you could go back and change the way you approach jiu-jitsu at white belt, what would you change? That's a very good question. There's a lot of things I would change, but if I was going to pick one thing that's the most important thing, I would say this. I would say if I could go back and learn jiu-jitsu as a white belt, I would roll a lot less competitively than I did. I would roll a lot more gentle than I did. I would care a lot less about winning those matches in the gym than I did. And you know, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I really was, you know, I wanted to win and I wanted to tap out my training partners, and we rolled hard, and my learning curve wasn't what it could be. So one of the things I tell students when I'm teaching my classes is in my seminars is when I talk about trying to roll relaxed and how good grips are letting go sooner instead of hanging on longer, and trying not to use a lot of explosiveness and physical muscle while you roll, and instead be more technical. I'm not doing that for any philosophical reason. It's not Aikido. I don't have some utopian hippie vision of what fighting or violence should be. I'm doing that for one reason only, and that's if you do that and you're smart about it, you will learn jiu-jitsu faster. And then when you do get into a competitive match or you get into a fight or self-defense situation, you're going to have this higher level of technical skill combined with all the strength and speed and youth and explosiveness that you can possibly muster under those circumstances. But by shelving those things in practice as much as possible and trying as much as you can to let the technique do the work, you're going to get better faster. And if you watch the really great jiu-jitsu competitors and you watch them compete and just look at their expression, and most of them tend to be fairly calm. This isn't the kind of sport where being, you know, really aggressive and angry and just going harder next time at the higher levels, you know, that's not going to help you beat a Hoffa Mendez or, you know, escape a Hodger's Mount. It's just, you have to have just a super high level of technique to ever play with them in any way where you can give them any kind of game whatsoever. And to accomplish that sooner rather than later, relax. So that's certainly what I would do. How has SBG improved you as a human being? My relationships with the people that I care about, which is my wife, my kids, my family, and my students and peers and fellow instructors of the organization, have been the catalyst for whatever maturity or growth I've had over the last all my adult life. And so it's not so much SBG helping me improve as a human being or any given organization, it's those relationships that you nurture. Again, it goes back to what I was talking about in the previous question, but having friendships and training partners that you've had for decades is a really powerful thing, you know, especially when both of you are honest with each other and you have an opportunity then to explore places where you need growth and somebody that's going to give you honest feedback. And if you isolate yourself, or you don't allow yourself to make those connections with people, it's very difficult, I think, to mature. We're social primates and we need that. So as much as possible, foster those meaningful relationships on the mat, off the mat, with your family, with your training partners, with your coaches. And that's going to be the most powerful thing as far as any personal growth. If you were not at SBG, what would you be doing? I have no idea. I'm one of the fortunate people that even when I was a little kid, I knew kind of that I wanted to do martial arts. I was just obsessed with martial arts. I know a lot of my other fellow coaches in the organization were kind of the same way. So There are other people that I've met that have had that same experience with different kinds of careers, whether it's music or whatever. And I think we're kind of fortunate that way because other people, maybe they're in their 30s or 40s and they kind of realize what they like to do or what they really want to do with their life as far as a career, and then they have to take that path, which is fine too. But I just feel grateful that I've always loved martial arts and I've been able to make a living at it. So it's difficult for me to put myself in a position of what I would be doing, but if I had to guess, I would say probably something academic because, you know, I enjoy reading and studying different topics. All right.
Not politics?
No. Have any of the coaches in SBG experienced BJJ as an addictive phenomenon? There are coaches in the organization that were former addicts or alcoholics or drug addicts, and I think that if you have that kind of personality, then you can be prone to be addicted to just about anything if you allow yourself to have an unhealthy relationship to it or allow that to happen. But having said that, I don't necessarily think that you know, going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week, as long as you're not abusing your body, you're not getting hurt, and training in a healthy way with good people is something you need to be afraid of or worried that you're going to be addicted to. You know, unless you're on performance-enhancing drugs, especially as you age, there's only so much training you can do in a week before, you know, you start to feel run down and you're overtraining, which you don't want to do. And so as long as you're maintaining those guidelines and you're able to still be productive and work and give time to your family, and go for it. It's not like drinking alcohol or taking heroin. All right. Do other BJJ gyms have a community that is religiously secular? Interesting question. So 2 things. SBG is not religiously secular. So SBG is a martial arts organization that's interested in the pursuit of truth as it relates to combat. And within that organization, we have a lot of coaches that focus on self-defense, on training police officers, on training military, on training kids, on training jiu-jitsu competitors, on training MMA athletes at the highest level, like with John Kavanaugh and Conor McGregor, to working with youth in after-school programs. I mean, everything in between is part of what we do. If it involves martial arts and self-defense or physical combat, the organization is going to be involved in one way or another. That has nothing to do with politics. That has nothing to do with religion. And so when I teach a seminar, I teach a class at my gym, those aren't subjects I bring up for a couple reasons. Number one, that's not what I'm getting paid to do. And I really respect and appreciate, I feel grateful for the fact that people will come and give a weekend of their life to come train with me some other place in the world and pay good money to be on the mat with me for 2 days. And I don't expect to abuse that trust that they've given me to teach them martial arts by then espousing my opinion on who should be president or what was before the Big Bang, right? Having said that, some of the friends my students are also maybe friends on my personal Facebook page, and I do have a personal Facebook page, and I occasionally, you know, will post an article about education or politics or religion that I find interesting, and I would hope that people can differentiate between whatever my beliefs are as it relates to social issues and politics from what I do in the organization. I also want to point out that yeah, there's a lot of atheists and secular people in the gym. There's also Christians, there's also Muslims, and there's also Buddhists. So I don't really care at all what your religious beliefs are or what your political beliefs are. My gym is filled with, I'm in Portland, so I've got a lot of liberal Democrats, but I also have conservatives, I have Republicans, I have libertarians. You go to another part of the United States and those coaches, a lot of their gym will be more conservative people. They're in a more conservative part of the country. All good, don't care. What really matters underneath all that, in terms of going back to the importance of long-term relationships and establishing those bonds, are values. And I've learned, especially over the last decade, that, you know, I share really important values with people who are Christian or have other religious beliefs, that maybe I don't share those particular religious beliefs about how the universe was created, but when it comes to raising our kids and the responsibilities and duties of being a husband or a father, of making sure that you contribute to society and you try and be a good citizen, those things, those which are way more important than anybody's existential beliefs about what happens after we die, those values I share, and that's what holds us together and what we have in common, and that's much more important. All right. How do you handle the feeling of not progressing? I do remember experiencing that when I was a blue or purple belt a long time ago. And what I remember realizing, I don't remember exactly when it was, I was probably around purple belt time. Purple belt is what Chris Howder calls, my coach calls the hump belt. It's like it's the belt you're usually at the longest, other than black belt, which you'll be for the rest of your life. And it's the belt where you tend to do the most work. If I remember correctly, I think Chris had me as a purple belt for like 6 or 7 years, which was perfect. And the reason is because when you're a white belt and someone's beating you or holding you in a headlock or you're having trouble escaping, whatever it is, your coach can then come in and give you a technical answer and you can drill that, and then you can go back and all of a sudden that problem is solved. And now you're able to overcome that problem with that particular opponent on the mat. And that then becomes, you equate that in your mind as learning and growing. And you're going to have this kind of a pretty quick learning curve as a young white belt and blue belt, where you're going to go from not being able to fight on the ground unless you wrestled before to, wow, you can really do a lot of stuff. And then once you get to be a purple belt, a young purple belt, you know most of that material. You're going to know technically probably as much as a lot of black belts know. You may not know the depth of it, but you certainly have the width of the information. And so the learning then at that point becomes more a question of timing. And that's not as easy to perceive as all of a sudden you learn a new technique and now you can escape. And that's a trickier thing. And so what you'll experience then is you might experience these long plateaus, what you think is a plateau or you feel it's a plateau, and then all of a sudden a spike in your ability. I certainly experienced that. Really what's going on there is your body is learning every time you do jiu-jitsu. Your body's acquiring timing every time you do jiu-jitsu. You may not mentally understand exactly what you're learning all the time because, again, this has more to do with timing and motion than it does new technique. But you're learning. And then all of a sudden, you have a moment where you realize, wow, I actually have gotten better. And that's kind of how it happens. So my answer to you would be, sure, I've had that in the past. But as time goes by, I realize that's just not how jiu-jitsu works. It's not like this continuous technique and then you get better, technique and then you get better. And you become more comfortable with the process, and you understand you're always learning when you're on the mat. Next question, what are the similarities between natural selection and fundamentals? I don't know that I can speak too well about similarities between natural selection and fundamentals, but what I have talked about before in the past is the similarities between natural selection and the process of developing a style. So in the process of developing your own personal fighting style, or your own, let's call it, if we're to use jiu-jitsu alone just to keep it simple, the process of developing your own personal jiu-jitsu game is a process of you going on the mat, learning the fundamentals, and then going on the mat and having these different pressures that you have to adapt to. Some big guys, some fast guys, some smaller, more technical person, all these different pressures. And under that pressure, your body then adapts and learns the best way to apply that fundamental for you. And it'll be different from anybody else. And once you become a black belt, if you come from a good school, you're gonna be different from your coach. You're gonna be different from other black belts, and your rolling style, as I've said many times before, will probably have a lot more to do with your personality than your build. And that process of how you develop your own style on the mat, that very much is a process of natural selection, where your body is adapting to different and evolving to different pressures on the mat. Do you ever roll with your eyes closed? Yeah, I do that all the time. I do that more and more the last few years, especially when I'm teaching or working a technique, or I'm trying to feel what the other person is doing. I do find it helpful sometimes just to close my eyes and kind of relax a little bit, connect better to the person wherever your position is, take away the slack, and then you can kind of really feel their movement, whether they're pushing or pulling or where their base is off. And so yes, it's very helpful. I would strongly recommend you do that. All right. When you broke off from the JKD groups to focus on aliveness, that must have been risky at the time. What gave you the confidence and belief to make it your own path? I don't really perceive it as being risky. I actually don't think it was risky. I can tell you at the time, again, we're talking 26 years ago, when I was in my young 20s, early 20s, I definitely didn't perceive it as risky. So what I saw was a lot of people who were either unwittingly involved in a kind of a fake martial art, or intentionally being incongruent with their own belief system. So they understood that you have arts that are for fighting, like Muay Thai or boxing, and that was part of the JKD training curriculum. And then they'd get together and click sticks or do some hand trapping technique that's absolutely ridiculous. And you'd have a book by Dan and Asano like Absorb What Is Useful, where they have side-by-side comparisons, and you'd have Paul Vinak showing the difference between having your hands up and the efficiency of a boxing stance in relationship to some traditional karate stance. And they were making comparisons. And that's a very healthy, very good thing to do. We have this taboo that existed in the martial arts where it's considered impolite or rude to do that, or somehow you're not being a good person to do that. That's completely backwards. If you think about any aspect of human learning, any field of human knowledge, how does that field of human knowledge grow from generation to generation? It grows by the people, the current generation, learning from the elders and the people that came before them what they have to offer, understanding it, appreciating it, and if they're in a good headspace, being grateful for it, but then building on that information, changing it, having it evolve in a way that's going to be more effective, and then passing that along. So we learn, each generation gets better than the generation that came before. That process stops the moment you say, oh, we can't criticize a method, or we can't criticize a technique or a way of doing things. This is not a personal attack. This is how we as human beings get better, and this is how engineering and sports and everything else evolves, except for traditional martial arts. So what I feel Dan and Asano was trying to do in that book and at that time was very healthy. Here's the problem. They had the side-by-side comparisons, and then all of a sudden you see them doing Penjak Silat. And they're doing something that's just as much of a dead pattern, but in many ways actually more ridiculous than Shotokan in terms of functionality. And so I saw that as hypocrisy. I saw that a lot of people, as happens when you're dealing in a group where there's a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of people having to make excuses and do these mental gymnastics to try and work it out. Well, this one's for self-preservation, and this one's for self-improvement, and this and this. And it's just like, I don't want to do that. I'm gonna pursue truth. I'm gonna pursue what I feel is the right thing to do for my students. I can't teach or pass along something I don't think is a good way or functional. It's just not something I'm gonna do. That's my personal decision. So I opened up my own school, and the rest is history. When I did that, did I perceive that there's some sort of risk? Absolutely not. What's the risk? What are they going to do? I mean, the only risk I really perceived is I didn't think I'd make any money, because everybody around me was telling me, we do it this way because people want to click sticks together. People want a certificate. They want to collect a certificate. Every time you do a seminar, you get a certificate. You know, that's what they were into. Notebooks. They want to collect patterns. And I said, well, okay, maybe that's true. It's not what I want to do, so I'm going to train the way I want to, and we'll see what happens. And, you know, my gym took off because there's a lot of people that want to train like I do. And now, 25 years later, 26 years later, of course we realize that, because there's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms and MMA schools all around the country, and it's very common. So there was a market there. That was the only real risk, but I never had any thought of anything else. I will tell you this, within the JKD community, there was this very strong taboo about speaking out against those things. And people did. I could see that people around me were kind of like, ooh, a little bit shocked, and they perceived some sort of risk, I guess, in terms of breaking a taboo. But honestly, even when I was a young man, I always thought that was a bit silly. All right. As a man that is usually anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds, heavier, and 1.5 feet taller than most of your training partners. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but yeah. Did you ever find it hard to distinguish when it comes to sheer size compared to technique that made a position or submission work? Did you ever have any self-conflict in believing that size didn't matter at times? Okay, so those are two different questions. Let me address the first one. I've never been very physically strong. I am tall, and I'm heavier now. When I started training this, I wasn't that heavy. I was 6'8" tall and probably 235 pounds. So it's pretty skinny. I had no wrestling background. If you were to ask me to do a pull-up, I would not have been able to do a pull-up. But having said that, I did realize I do have weight. If I'm rolling with somebody that's 170 or 180 pounds, I do have weight. And once you learn to use weight in jiu-jitsu, that becomes very powerful. That, combined with the fact that at the time, my most competitive training partners, the ones that were the most capable of tapping me out, that I was working with on a regular basis, weren't higher level jiu-jitsu guys. They were high level wrestlers. And so the notion that, I do have a weight advantage, combined with the fact that I'm not going to get on top of these guys even if I wanted to, meant that for the first 10 or 15 years I did jiu-jitsu, I almost always started and played from the guard. So I would start from my back, I would play from the guard. If I got a sweep and got on top, I'd do that. But again, up until I was about a black belt, I wasn't really even doing that many sweeps. So what I would do is I would just play from guard bottom. If they passed, I would try and get my guard back, and my submissions were all from guard bottom. I would be doing things like triangles and arm bars from the bottom. I did that for two reasons. One, a lot of times when I'm rolling with the wrestlers, I didn't have a choice. And two, if the other person was smaller than me in terms of weight, I would often just start there anyway to kind of put myself at a disadvantage. Now, no, I don't feel any conflict, because I know when I'm using muscle. I know when I'm having to hang on too tight. I know when I roll with another good black belt and they're starting to pass my guard, or they're putting me in trouble, and I all of a sudden clamp down, or I use muscle for a minute, or I use explosiveness for a minute. I know I have a little sense of shame in that, and usually my training partners know, and we'll kind of look at each other, and I'll see John Frankel or somebody else like, and I'll be like, and then I'll go back and I'll try not to do that, and we all have those moments, but I'm not caught by surprise. I know when I'm rolling that way and when I'm not rolling that way. And now at my age, and I'll be 50 very soon, I can't roll that way with my younger athletes and survive just because of cardio. So they're, no matter what kind of shape I'm in, they're going to be able to go a little bit longer. So my rolling, whether I'm on top or bottom, does have to just be more efficient. Going back to a question that was asked earlier, what I would change, I wish I rolled when I was 22 the way I roll now at 49. Because I would be much, much better in jiu-jitsu right now. And my body wouldn't be I wouldn't suffer as many, little aches and pains as I have now. But having said that, you can learn from my mistakes and take that out of the equation. So the second part was, did you ever have any self-conflict in believing that size didn't matter at times? I've never believed that size didn't matter. So sometimes when I've talked about, or other coaches in the gym have talked about, what we call non-attribute based training, which was a term that we started using 15 or 20 years ago to kind of define the goal of what we were talking about. What I meant by that was, if you're very strong, if you're very explosive, if you're very fast, whatever it is, you have these athletic gifts. The more you can shelf those gifts while you're working in the gym with your training partners and your teammates, the better you're going to be in the long run at jiu-jitsu. There's going to be a time where you're going to want to go hard, especially if you're getting ready for a competition, to know what that feels like, to be prepared for that pressure. But you don't need to roll like that every time. You don't need to roll like that much. And if you're not getting ready for a specific competition, you really almost never need to roll like that. You can roll soft and be competitive in jiu-jitsu and get very, very good. Does that mean I think size doesn't matter? No. What it means is I think size really does matter. And the only way you're going to overcome that size, and the only way you're going to overcome that youth, and the only way you're going to overcome that sheer physical strength of this other person who wants to beat you up, who's bigger, stronger, younger than you are, is for your technique to be that much better than them. And for your technique to be that much better than them, then you have to roll like you're a 110-pound woman, not a 270-pound man. And this is one of the reasons why I think women, I've said before, overall, painting with a broad brush, tend to learn jiu-jitsu quicker. Some of my female black belts have gone from a white belt to highly competitive black belt with men or women within 5 or 6 years. And I've had strong, young, big male athletes that have been blue belts for 12 years. And the difference there is the ability of that blue belt to just shelf those attributes, not be so stubborn, and learn jiu-jitsu. And their inability to do that has caused them to kind of plateau, whereas the younger female athlete or the older female athlete, she didn't have a choice. She's not going to be able to roll with a young, strong man and out-muscle him, so she has to use the technique. So to me, that's common sense, and the general rule is really simple. It goes like this. I want you to have as much size and strength and speed and physical attributes and gas in your tank as humanly possible. I want you to be as strong and fast as you can be. And I want you to use as little of it as humanly possible when you train in the gym. When you get in a competition against another school member, absolutely, if you're IBJJF and you go as hard and strong as you can in that tournament. You're in a fight, absolutely. You're in the cage, you go as hard and strong as you can. You're defending yourself or your family, of course, you go as hard and strong as you can. In the gym with your teammates, shelf as much of that as you can. I want you to have as much as you can, and I want you to use as little as you can. It's really that simple. Thanks for watching. Make sure you click like and subscribe, and click on the bell icon for notifications. And don't forget to check out SBGU. It's our newest project, my newest project that I'm very proud of. We're taking all of the information that we've accumulated over the decades for SBG and all the new material that's coming out. We're putting it online so I can finally have contact with all our students around the world and answer questions and get to know all of you better. So make sure you check it out.